Thank you all for being here. This is a deep pleasure for me. I end up doing too much speaking all over the world all the time. In fact, I have to leave before this day is over to get down and give a couple talks in the Bay Area today. But this one I've been looking forward to for a very long time, ever since Daniela first emailed and asked if I could come. And it took a little arranging and things, but the reason I was looking forward to it, obviously, was because talking to active and involved young people is the most useful use of my time. You guys are either going to make the difference or not make the difference in the next 20 or 30 years, and maybe much more quickly than that. And so it's really, really important and really, really great that you guys are as active and involved already as you are. And I want to show you in a little while, just to give you a little sense that you're not alone at all in this work. And that'll be, I think, hopeful and uplifting. But first I'm going to be depressing for a minute. And for that I apologize. And I apologize especially because at your age, in a sense, you should not have to deal too much with the most difficult realities around us. Climate change isn't exactly your fault really yet, and it is kind of scary, some of it. On the other hand, we're kind of past the point where it makes sense to sort of hold back, and you guys are at an age and a maturity, I think, just to deal frankly with difficult stuff. So I will for a minute. I did write the first book on climate change back in 1989, i.e. long before you were born. Over the last, at that time, we knew most of what we needed to know about global warming. We knew that when you burned coal and gas and oil, you put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we knew that its molecular structure trapped heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. What we didn't know was how quickly this would cause trouble. And the truth is, and it's the hard truth, that it's happened much more quickly and on a much larger scale than we would have thought 20 years ago. Partly this is because, I forgot to do the thing you're supposed to do in these circumstances. Partly that's because scientists are conservative, but partly it's because it was hard for any of us to imagine that you really could change the world in fundamental ways. Human civilization grew up over the last 10,000 years in what scientists call the Holocene, a period of remarkable climatic stability. But in your lifetime, we've left the Holocene. We've gone into something else. We don't really have a name for it yet, and we're not sure how far into it we're going to go. Really, that depends on your actions, our actions over the next little while. But here's just to give you an example of the scale of what's going on. When I was your age, the first pictures were coming back from the Apollo missions to outer space, and we got our first view of the planet as a whole. This beautiful blue-white marble set against the black void of space. And the truth is, those pictures are as out of date now as my high school yearbook picture is. The world doesn't look like that anymore. In the summer, there's 40% less ice up at the Arctic. You can't see it with the naked eye, but the oceans, all the world's oceans, are about 30% more acid than they were 40 years ago because the chemistry of seawater changes as it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. Maybe the most stark change that we notice on land and in the whole planet is what's happening to hydrology, to the way that water moves around the Earth. The most important physical principle to bear in mind, I think, for this century is simply that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. The atmosphere is about 4% wetter on average than it was 40 years ago, which is an astonishingly large change in a basic physical parameter of the Earth. And what it does is load the dice, make it far more likely that we'll see both drought and flood. And we are seeing both drought and flood, and it's really devastating and hard to watch. This change is happening quickly. We're still at the beginning edge of it. So far, we've raised the temperature about 1 degree, and that's caused all that Arctic ice melt and ocean acidification and drought and flood. But the same scientists who predicted that tell us that we're looking at a temperature increase of 4 or 5 degrees before the century is out, unless we can very, very quickly get off coal and gas and oil, much more quickly than any government is planning to at the moment. And temperature increases like that may well be impossible to deal with. A team at Stanford 2 years ago, a team of agronomists did a study where they just looked at what happens to grain yields around the world when you raise temperatures like that, because of course wheat and corn and soybeans and rice all evolved in the Holocene the way we did, you know. That's the temperature they're comfortable with. What they found is that from this point on, each degree increase in global temperature should cut grain yields about 10%. That's a very painful thing to think about. Our world is already very much on the edge, trying to feed 7 billion people. Cutting back the number of calories, 10 or 20 or 30%, would be a huge disaster, one that we can't let happen. And so that's what I want to talk to you mostly about, how we're going to try to keep that from happening, how we are trying. And the basic message is we're trying to build out of nothing a kind of movement that can rise to this occasion. Now, I'm not an activist by nature. I'm a writer, as you can tell from my biography. So I don't, you know, I'm not good at getting up and talking and giving presentations and organizing and things. There are people who are really good at that, and I'm really glad that my friends from the Alliance for Climate Education are here, because they're doing really wonderful work like this all over the country. But some years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 4 years ago, it seems like 40 years ago, myself and 7 students at Middlebury College in Vermont, where I hang out when I'm home, which isn't as often as I'd like, we started this thing called 350.org because we wanted to do global climate organizing. We knew that we needed some kind of big movement because the fossil fuel industry has so much money that have been able to dominate the debate and keep any action from happening that might really make change. Now, when we were starting, one of our problems was, as we thought about how we might go about organizing the planet, which was hard enough considering we had no money and no, particular skills or anything, but the biggest problem that we faced as we thought about it was the simple fact that though this problem is global in nature and has to be dealt with globally, that's hard because everybody around the world insists on speaking their own language, which makes it very difficult to organize. It's difficult even if you have all the money in the world. I was thinking about this the other day when I was reading about Coca-Cola, which has a lot of money. And before you guys were born or when you were young, Coca-Cola's slogan, their advertising slogan was "Coke adds life," okay? Which they had to stop using because they were putting up billboards all over the world in different languages, many of which apparently translated to "Coke brings your ancestors back from the dead." Okay? And this was not a good advertising slogan, as it turned out. So it's easy to sort of get things confused as you cross, languages and things. That's why we were kind of both horrified and thrilled to read a paper that came out in January of 2008, a scientific paper from the most important climatologist in the world, a NASA scientist named James Hansen. And what he and his team said was, we now know enough about climate to know how much carbon in the atmosphere is too much. He said any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. Okay? Now that's strong language for scientists to use. It's much stronger language when you know that we're already, well past 350. Wherever you are today, you know, in San Jose, California, or in San Jose, Costa Rica, or in you know, any place else on the planet, it's 393 parts per million CO2 out there. That's why everything's melting, burning, flooding, whatever. So it was a hard paper to read, because reading it, one realized we're never going to completely stop global warming. The best we're going to do is kind of keep it from getting worse than it has to be. But as we were reading it, we thought, the one good thing here now is that we have a number to work with. And you wouldn't normally, you know, try to build a big campaign around a number, because it's sort of a wonky scientific data point, you know, and so on. But Arabic numerals have the great advantage of translating wherever you are. So we figured, maybe this can be since 350 will be the same thing in California and China, this might be a good way to proceed. So we started this thing called 350.org. And as I say, there were 7 young people, just 2 or 3 years older than you guys, who were doing most of this. And 7 was a good number, because there are 7 continents, so each one of them took one, and we went to work. The guy who took the Antarctic also had to take the internet, okay, because it's you know, its own continent. And we set off to work, and our work was finding people like ourselves in places around the world. Not everywhere, especially in the really poor parts of the world, are there environmentalists, but there's always somebody who's worried about public health, about hunger, about war and peace, about all the things that are going to go completely haywire, are going haywire as we degrade the planet's physical systems. And so those were the people we were looking for and trying to find. And we did organizing camps, like for young people. We did one, I remember doing one in Turkey for Central Asia, and one in the Caribbean, and one in Delhi, and we did a great one in Johannesburg. We brought a couple of kids from each country in Africa down to Johannesburg. Most had never been on an airplane before. Most had really never left their countries, but they were good organizers, and they fanned back out across the planet, you know, to sort of carry on their work. And we told them we're going to take one day to kind of kick this off. And the day we chose was just sort of random almost day in the fall of October 2009. So October 24th, and we said, everybody do something on this day to kind of bring this number to people's attention, to make it part of the international conversation. And we did not know how this would go, because, you know, we had no money. We weren't, you know, it wasn't like we were the Sierra Club or some huge organization. But we got the sense it might work 2 days early, okay, October 22nd. We were sitting down in a little office that we'd borrowed in Manhattan, one room, and there were, you know, 8 of us around the table with our laptops up, writing press releases and sending out emails and things. And the phone rings, and the person on the other end is our organizer in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. She's 17. She was our lead organizer for Ethiopia, Lily. And she's almost in tears. She said, the government took away our permit for Saturday, so we can't do our thing. That's not a really particularly nice government in Ethiopia. She said, so we're doing it today before they can stop us. Okay? And she said, we're really sorry. We don't want to spoil it for everybody, and we don't want to jump the gun, and we were so looking forward to doing it the same day as everybody else. And we have 15, what did they say? We have 15,000 kids right now out in the street in Addis Ababa chanting 350. So I was like, Lily, don't worry about the date, it's okay, you know? And it really was okay, it was fantastic. And it was fantastic for the next like 72 hours as these pictures rolled in from around the world. The very next one came from US servicemen in Afghanistan. They made a 350 in sandbags. They sent a note saying we're parking our Humvee for the weekend and walking, you know. I'm just going to show you a few pictures just because I want you to see who your colleagues are, who your brothers and sisters are around the world, okay? because there are a lot of people engaged in this work, and that's good to know. Before the weekend was out, there had been 5,100 demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN said it was the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. But the thing that was most interesting for me was that the thing I'd always heard about environmentalism, okay, was that it was something for rich white people who had taken care of their other problems, and that if you had to worry about where your next meal was coming from or something, that you wouldn't be an environmentalist. And this just turned out not to be true. I mean, by far the biggest, the people we work with most around the world are poor, black, brown, Asian, young, because that's what the world is mostly made up of, and absolutely as concerned about the future as anybody else, maybe more so, because if you live in a place like Bangladesh, the future is bearing down on you pretty darn hard, okay? So we had pictures coming in from places that I'd actually never heard of, and places, of course, that I knew well. Our great friends in India, the India Youth Climate Coalition, did a magnificent job. They had 300 big demonstrations across India that day. That's Calcutta. It was really something to see all over India. Some of it was coming from places we couldn't even quite figure out. These pictures were just flooding into Flickr. That's obviously someplace in Buddhist Asia. I'm guessing Sri Lanka, but I don't know for sure. But I just liked the picture a lot. And some of them from places just of incredible poverty. Those are dugout canoes on the Congo River, someplace above Kinshasa. This is what Joseph Conrad called the heart of darkness, once upon a time. It's a remote part and poor part of the world. They didn't have a digital camera, okay? They tried to develop the picture in someone's home darkroom. It didn't come out so well, so they wrote in what their banner had said. But that the message had reached there and that people were responding made me super happy. And the same kind of thing going on. We actually had a couple of hundred underwater demonstrations that day. There were 350 people, divers down on the Great Barrier Reef, because those corals are, getting wrecked as the sea changes. Huge thing, but just lots of super creative kind of. That's the Space Needle in Seattle, It's an operating room in Puerto Rico. Hopefully they didn't stop for too long, to do this. But just beautiful images all over the place. Strong involvement from religious communities around the world. Okay, this makes me happy because I'm a Methodist Sunday school teacher myself. But I mean, just every kind of faith. There's the head of Muslim South Africa. Next to him, the head of kind of native indigenous traditions in South Africa. Behind them in the scarlet is the Anglican Archbishop of South Africa at the head of this big multi-faith march, and Pentecostal schools and evangelical colleges. I'd been to Bethlehem to do some organizing. Hard place to get to, lots of military checkpoints in the way, but the Dead Sea is shrinking very rapidly as temperatures rise. So people wanted to do something. Too many military checkpoints to do it all together, but the Jordanians said, we'll make a 3 on our beach. The Palestinians said, we'll do the 5 along our shore. The Israelis said, we'll do the 0 where we live. It was a good day for that kind of cooperation. And there was lots of that, We were looking for iconic places. So, in India, great palaces of the Rajas, but it was autumn Saturday in the US, so football games. There's the Syracuse cheerleaders helping us out in front of 100,000 people, and, but just all over the world, this kind of beautiful stuff going on, including in places, I gotta say, that really moved me a lot. You guys are too young to recall this, but Bhopal was the scene of one of the greatest environmental crimes of all time, when Union Carbide let its factory disintegrate to the point that it gave off a toxic cloud of ammonia and things that killed 3,000 people in one night in the slums of Bhopal. And that people were willing to even, it sort of amazed me that people were gracious enough to even want to be part of some kind of thing like this, but they were. And, all over the place, you get a sense of, we had a lot of good climbers, so take a look at that banner and then try to find it there on the wall of the canyon. Soweto is in South Africa. It was the place that was the heartland of resistance to apartheid. And Big, huge black township, very poor. They did 350 bungee jumps that day, but the bungee line was strung between the cooling towers of a defunct coal-fired power plant there. And they sent us a note saying, this is the best use for coal-fired power plants from now on, you know. Those are some of, that's one of my students with a time-lapse camera. And there's my daughter who's in there someplace. Because we're, you know, our maple forest, those are sap buckets where we collect maple syrup in the spring, but our maple forest is under real threat as temperature warms. 300 big demonstrations across China, where it's not easy to do this kind of thing. One of them did get broken up by the police, but most went off just fine. Those are people from the China Youth Climate Network making a human wind turbine, and behind them you can see the edge of the largest wind farm on the planet, you know. And just on and on and on and on. There's thousands of these. Those are our friends, the Student Government Association of the Maldive Islands in the Indian Ocean. The Maldives are just paradise, okay? 1,200 islands, these archipelagos strung across the equator along the Indian Ocean, white sand beaches, coral reefs, waving palm trees. The only problem in this place is that the highest point in the whole country is about 1.5 meters above sea level. Okay? So as the temperature warms and oceans rise, the odds that this 5,000-year-old culture will become a 5,100-year-old culture are pretty slim at this point. They're like trying to figure out where they might relocate their population to someday. No one really knows, because South Asia is not just sort of full of vacant real estate, you know, to go to. But they're fighting such a good fight, and there are, you know, it's an entirely Muslim nation. There are maybe our strongest allies in the whole world, the people in the Maldives. But there, I just wanted to show you the picture of the Student Government Association holding their meeting in the lagoon to demonstrate what's going to happen on their island. It was a great day, and you know, it was the biggest story. It was led Google News for 36 hours, which meant more people were linking to it than anything else on Earth. And partly because people just didn't look the way that you know, people think environmentalists are supposed to look. You know, there's Yemen, one of the tougher countries on Earth, and the zero in that picture is all women in full black burqa. You know, they don't look to us like environmentalists, but they're, you know, have the same set of thoughts as people who go to the Sierra Club meeting or something. Like, I care about the future. I want to make sure that this planet works. You know. Oil-rich sheikhs in Abu Dhabi, but somewhat smarter than your average oil-rich person. You look behind them, you see the edge of the largest solar array on our planet. They're, I think, trying to make sure they will be rich no matter what it is that we're fueling our country with, our world with. But just beautiful pictures from all kinds of places, and there were, I confess, 400 or 500 pictures that went into a file that was just labeled 350 adorable. And they really were adorable, and they really were kind of sad too, because, you know, those girls may well be refugees by the time they're old enough to be mothers. And it won't be through any fault of their own, of course, because nobody in the Maldives burns enough fossil fuel to make the slightest bit of difference. It's those of us in this part of the world that are, of course, the problem. And so it's a special burden on us to figure out what we're going to do about it. We keep doing this kind of work at 350 and trying to build this movement bigger and stronger. And we need you guys to help us and to help all kinds of other people. The next big chance for this will be in a few weeks. We're doing a global day of action on May 5th, 5/5, we're just calling it Connect the Dots, okay? What we're trying to do is have people rally in all those places that have seen already some of the sting of climate change, whether it's, you know, Pakistan, which had floods that put 20 million people out of their homes, or Texas, where 500 million trees died in the drought last year, or Thailand, where the flooding in December caused the GDP, the economy, to contract by 9%, or, you know, the Horn of Africa, where people are dying of drought, or the mountains of California, where the snowpack and the glaciers are shrinking, or, you know, on and on and on. And also people rallying in places where people are starting to do things about this kind of stuff, where they're putting up solar panels or windmills or figuring out other things to be doing. We want people to connect those dots so they understand that the impact that we're seeing, they're not just sort of scattered, isolated events, that they're very much part of a pattern, and a pattern that we have to address as quickly as we possibly can. We're doing lots of other work too. In the introduction, we talked about this fight about this big Keystone pipeline down out of the tar sands of Canada down to the US that we fought last year. And I'm not going to spend a long time talking about that, except to say that it reminds me that there are different kinds of jobs for people in these movements, especially people of different ages, okay? So one of the things we did when we were fighting this Keystone pipeline, when we were starting it, was to do some civil disobedience in the sort of tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King or people like that. We went to Washington and we sat in outside the White House for 2 weeks. People knew people each day, and we were arrested and taken away, and it was actually quite effective. It raised the public profile of this issue. But here's the thing. The letter that I sent out telling people, asking people to come to this, was very clear that this time we didn't want young people to have to be in the lead, as they usually are. Because if you're 17 or 21 or 23 or something, getting an arrest record's not a good idea. You know, we don't need you doing that, all right? One of the few privileges of growing older is that, you know, past a certain point, what are they going to do to you? You know, not much. So it was really neat. People your parents and grandparents' age stood up, did the right thing. We didn't ask people how old they were when they were getting arrested, because that would have been rude, you know. But we said, who was president when you were born? Okay. And the two biggest groups had been born during the FDR and the Truman administrations. Okay. You know, the last day we were, this was turned into the biggest civil disobedience action in 30 years in this country. And on the last day, there was a man arrested with a sign around, he's 86 years old, and he has a sign around his neck that said, World War II veteran, handle with care. He'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, you know, so a very long time ago indeed. Yes, some of you might not even remember there was a president called Warren Harding. The point is that it's going to take all kinds of creative action, people building beautiful new technologies, and people standing up to the oil companies and the powers that be, you know, and people doing great things locally, which we all have to do to make our campuses work better, but also all of us realizing that we have to work as citizens of our nation and our planet too, and work at that level also. And none of this is easy, and there's actually no guarantee that it's all going to come out all right either, you know. There's already, the planet's warming, and there'll be some more warming even if we do everything right. But no group of people has ever had a more important challenge than the one that we have, than the one that you have. And it'll be the most interesting and most important question for your whole lives. And so it's an awfully good thing that you're getting started early and figuring it out, because we're going to need you very much in the, as I say, you know, from the beginning of 350.org, mostly I work with people your age, and they're the ones who are leading this fight around the planet, and you're in good company. And though I can't promise you we'll win, I'll look forward to just sort of standing shoulder to shoulder with you in this fight going forward. So thank you all very, very much.
Now we're opening the floor for 20 minutes of question and answer with Bill McKibben. So who would like to start? And Bill McKibben will take it from here.
Or comments or abuse or critique or whatever you want is good. Or that's okay too. Yeah.
Back there.
Hi, thank you, Bill. I'm curious, what do you believe are the most important factors for success in the Keystone Oil campaign?
Well, the first thing to be said is success is extremely relative here. Environmentalists only win temporary victories, and I'm afraid this one's going to be more temporary than most. I think we may well lose this particular fight even in the next few months. The oil industry has fought back with hundreds of millions of dollars in TV ads, and I'm afraid that the Congress and the President are likely to buckle in the face of all that. That said, it was a good thing to have done, and is a good thing to be doing, in part because we really did figure out some of the things that we'll need to do in order to be effective going forward. One is to be very united. All the environmental groups and a lot of other kind of people work very well together in this, instead of fragmenting their efforts and each doing, and going in different directions. It was really good. And we had strong involvement of many different kinds of people. The Indigenous Environmental Network was really key, all the Indians on both sides of the border, because this thing is such an atrocity up in Canada. They've just wrecked a huge part of northern Canada doing this, and land that once, of course, belonged to Native people. And then we worked really well with ranchers and farmers and things down in places like Nebraska, where the pipeline was going to go, who may still go, who were outraged about it all. And we kept a very positive viewpoint the whole time. Like, a couple of months after those sit-in, we went back to Washington, and this time we encircled the White House with people. But it wasn't like angry, neither was the sit-in. It wasn't like angry. It was, all the signs were just quotes from Barack Obama in 2008 about how he was going to deal with climate change and things. And so we were just, it was sort of hopeful in its way. That may have been symbolized. The other thing that was interesting about those sit-ins that we did, the other thing I told people, besides that it shouldn't be young people who had to go get arrested, the other thing was, I said, if you want to come do this, we need you to be wearing your Sunday best when you come. Okay, we need you in a necktie or a dress or whatever. Not, as you can tell, because I'm a big necktie guy, but because we wanted a visual way to say something that I think is really important, which is that in this work we're doing, all the people you'll see today, the people from ACE and so on and so forth, we're not the radicals in this fight. All we'd like is a world that works a little bit like the one we were born onto. The radicals work at oil companies and coal companies, because they're doing the most radical thing that any humans have ever done. They're altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere, even though scientists have told them that it's going to be a disaster. In order to make money, they're going ahead and doing it. And that's the most that's, it's the kind of, it's so radical, it's almost hard for us to sort of imagine it. It's the kind of thing, if you were having the next James Bond movie or something, the villain would be like, give me $1 trillion, or I will alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere, but since it's, powerful people who are doing this, we don't even think twice about it. But that's what they are, great radicals. And showing that was important.
Aside from raising awareness, how do you think people like teens or anyone should take action?
Right. Well, so raising awareness is sort of part of, is in its sense deeply taking action, okay? Here's the thing. You all know a lot of things you can do in your local school and your house and your community, right? Like by now you've all pestered your parents to make sure that you have the right light bulbs in, and that you're not driving a semi-military vehicle to go to the grocery store, and all those sort of things. We're past that, or at least we know how to be past that. And those are important things to do. The trouble is, given the amount of time we have to deal with climate change, we're not going to win this battle just by doing those things. It won't add up fast enough. If we had 100 years, that's how it should work. We should work by addition. You find out about this and you do good things, and your brother-in-law sees it and he changes his house, and then 3 people down the street figure that out and they work at it, and slowly we change our zoning codes and build. given 100 years, that's how it would work, and it's really how it would best work, that kind of slow, graceful transition. You know, that's how change should happen in human societies. Unfortunately, physics and chemistry aren't giving us that kind of time. So along with working by addition like that, we also have to figure out how to work by multiplication, which means politics. It means changing the basic set of rules under which we work. The most important rule that we have to change, and it has to be done in Congress and then at the UN, you know, is to set a price on carbon to reflect the damage that it does in the atmosphere. If you think about it, the reason that we're in this fix is that the fossil fuel industry is the only industry in the world that gets to put its waste out for free, okay? So, like last night, I had an excellent dinner in one of these Japanese restaurants just across the street over here in that little mini mall across the way, okay? And there were like 8 or 9 restaurants there. It was hard to choose where to eat. Each of those guys would make more money if, at the end of the night, they just took all their waste and dumped it out in the middle of the parking lot or out in the middle of the street, okay? Because they wouldn't have to pay someone to cart it away. If they were able to work like oil companies, that's what they do. The problem is that if you did that, a week later, this neighborhood would be overrun with rats, and you'd be getting, you know, plague or leptospirosis or something like that. Which is why 150 years ago we said, no, you can't just dump all your waste out in the middle of the street. You got to find someone to take care of it in a responsible way, and it's going to cost some money, and that's how it works, okay? The only people who don't have to do that are the fossil fuel industry. What we need to do is charge them for that, and if we do, the price of fossil fuel will go up to the point where we will quickly find the wide array of other substitutes that we need, you know? That's the most important policy change, but it only will happen when we have enough political power to beat the fossil fuel industry, or at least to make them want to negotiate a little bit, okay? Because at the moment, they win everything. They have all the power, right? And so it's very hard to get change on these fundamental ways. So raising awareness is a deeply consequential act in that way. And one of the things we've said, you know, you saw those pictures from, you know, we've done many of these big days of action. Some of you helped with the big moving planet thing we did last fall. It was mostly around bicycles and things like that. It was beautiful all over the world. But I think this thing in May, there'll be a lot of that, a lot of the usual kind of upbeat and happy. Some places, people are going to be a little angrier this time, you know. It's going to be a little edgier, and I think almost that's appropriate. You know, when they had the floods in Pakistan two years ago, summer of 2010, it was almost unbelievable what happened. They'd never had rain in anywhere near like that amounts. The region up in the Khyber Pass, top of Pakistan, that normally gets 3 feet of rain in a year, got 12 feet of rain in a week, okay? That's what's possible now in the new kind of world we've created with these new kind of rules. And hence the Indus River flooded to the point where 20 million people were out of their homes. We got a lot of friends and colleagues in Pakistan. They're, you know, they'll be a little bitter, I think, when they do this thing on May 5th, and I think that's okay. I think people need to start understanding that this is for real and serious. Other places it'll be lots of fun as usual. I just talked to our climbing team who are going up to Dana Pass up in the Sierras, Dana Glacier up in the Sierras, a glacier that's, you know, like a half the size that it used to be, melting fast, and they're going to put this huge banner, 100,000 square foot banner up across it, and the question was what we should write on it, you know, and something like "Stop Global Warming" or something. And I said, maybe, are there any Wizard of Oz fans in here? I said maybe we should just write at the end. It's just, you know, the most important lines from Wizard of Oz. Just say, "I'm melting on the glacier," you know. And so that's what it'll say, I think.
Thank you, Bill. I want to thank you not just for raising awareness, but also inspiring action. Mountain View City Library, which is just north of here, chose your book Earth for their community read, and they for the month of last November, and they organized 20 different colloquiums and activities that were suggested by your book and to discuss your book, from electric cars to
Fantastic.
energy alternatives, etc. So thank you for that. And I'd like to know what is the website we can go to see all of those pictures and find out more about your main event?
The very good thing about our organization is it has exactly the same name as our website. So if you go to 350.org, you're all set. It's funny, we weren't really thinking about, that when we did it, but it turned out to be a smart piece of organizing, because if you're looking down a list of environmental organizations online, you see a long list in the Sierra Club and whatever, but just because the name is 350.org, computers automatically highlight it so you can click through it immediately to the websites. We were very strategic and savvy, I must say. It's good fun.
How have you seen the green movement evolve over the years, and with respect to changes?
How have I seen the green movement evolve over the years and involvement of young people? Well, let's think about, in many ways, the high point of the green movement in this country and around the world in certain ways was pretty near the beginning. 1970 was the first Earth Day in America. Okay, so more than, 42 years ago now. First Earth Day, 20 million Americans were out in the streets that day. That was, given the population of the time, that was 1 in 10 Americans. Okay, so a huge number of people. And that made an impression on politicians. And in the next 3 or 4 years, they passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, all the laws that are that cleaned up the air in California and cleaned up the water in the Great Lakes and protected, the bald eagle and all these kind of things, the California condor. That was the high water mark, because after that, the kind of green movement went to sleep a little bit. And everybody said, well, we've won this battle, or, the courts will look out for us, or whatever. And everybody that's why we're trying to build this movement again, And it's hard because there's a lot of other things that everybody's got to work on, and sometimes they're more immediate or seem more immediate than things like climate. But also just because we've gotten used to the idea that someone else is going to take care of, and all of us, I know I felt like the day that Barack Obama got elected, I was like, oh, okay, I can relax for a little while. This guy will say, well, you know what, that's not how it works. Even good people who say the right things, they're under such pressure all the time from, think about how much money there is in, say, the fossil fuel industry. Exxon made more money each of the last 5 years than any company in the history of money, okay? That just gives them so much power. And we're never going to have money like that, so we have to figure out other currencies to work in. So, passion and spirit and creativity. And sometimes, we have to put our bodies on the line like people in other movements have had to do. This is no different in that sense from the civil rights movement or from Gandhi's, Gandhi teaching us all how to do this kind of work across India in the days before independence. The only difference in this case is that we have to work quickly. The civil rights movement, Dr. King, my great hero, always said, whenever he gave a speech, he said he used an important line that you have to think about it a little bit to figure out what it means, but it was a quote from an abolitionist in Theodore Parker in the 19th century. It said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Okay? So it takes a long time to get where we're going, but we're going to get there. Okay? The universe is headed in the direction of justice and I think what Martin Luther King and his people felt like was that they were just speeding up that process, you know, pointing out where it needed to go. The trouble with climate change is the arc of the physical universe, by comparison, is kind of short, and it seems to bend toward heat, you know, and so we got to work really fast. And if we don't get it done, I mean, I wish I could just tell you guys, relax. Your job is to hang out here in high school and go to college and get the best education you can, and then get a job, and you'll be leading the world in 15, 20 years, and you'll be in a position to do stuff and whatever. You know, that's really how it should work. But we're going to have to ask you, while you're doing all that other stuff, going to college and getting a job, we're also going to have to ask you to be full-on citizens, fully involved in this kind of fight. Because otherwise, I'm afraid the world that you're going to have to go, you know, be leaders in 30 or 20 or whatever years is not going to be that good a world, you know. So, wish I could say otherwise. But, and as I say, to the role of young people, look, around the world, it's young people who are being the leaders on this thing. Partly that's because when you get to the developing world, everybody's young. You know, you get to places in Africa or Asia. I mean, the average age is like 24 or something, which means that half the people are younger than that. So it just, you know, it just stands to reason. But everywhere, including this country, and those of you who got to go to Power Shift know just how amazing it is to, you know, be there and see 10,000 young people from all over the country who are like, yeah, we're going to get it done. And, you know, it's certainly the thing that keeps me cheerful and going.
Great, we have time for one last question. I'm so sorry to cut it off, but
They run a tight ship at this place.
You mentioned the urgency of getting things done, and so are you, and then you mentioned Sierra Club and Earth Day and what Al Gore is trying to do. So are you joining forces with them? Or?
We all now work together, and that was one of the best things about this whole fight about this Keystone Pipeline. Okay, I spent 3 days in jail in Washington, and the guy in the cell next to me was an old friend of mine, a 70-year-old guy who at the first Earth Day was one of the guys who was leading things, and then founded the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is, along with the Sierra Club, one of the oldest, biggest, you know, whatever, environmental groups. And he was always been very establishment environmentalist, you know, and things. But he, you know, at a certain point he just decided we're not getting action fast enough, and we need to work, you know, all of us, the kind of, you know, together. And it was funny, we were there in jail, and reporter, he managed to sort of smuggle out a note to the reporter. And what he said in the note was, really stuck in my head. He said, I've held a lot of important positions in this town. He'd been chair of the President's Council on Environmental Quality, he'd been the dean at Yale, he'd been, you know, I've held a lot of important positions, but none of them seem as important as the one I'm in right now, you know. Not you have to be in jail, but to be just engaged in this movement, in this fight, you know, understanding that it really is kind of a fight about power and that kind of thing, and that it won't be solved just by doing kind of easy, obvious things. It's got to be solved partly by standing up. So that was really, to me, very moving. And yeah, no, we work together and the part that we bring to it, since I'm the, you know, 350.org, since I'm the only old guy there, everybody else is your guys' age, you know. The part we bring to it, help the Sierra Club and all these guys, is like, my crew knows how to do everything with the web, and they, you know, just set up websites, do this, that, and which, you know, like the Sierra Club would be not so good at, you know, and so it's, you know, we all work together and it works well. Not well enough yet, but we're trying, and we really look forward to seeing you guys. You guys will all figure out the things that you're particularly good at and how you want to be involved and how it all sticks together. But we'll look forward to seeing you on May 5th and see pictures of you doing something cool for that day. And one of the reasons it's so important that you do it is that there'll be other people looking at those pictures from around the world, especially in the poorest parts of the world, and for them to see that people in the rich parts of the world, some of them anyway, understand that there's a big problem and want to do something about it. That to them is extraordinarily important. You know, when your colleagues, people your age in the Maldives, go online and look and see that people in Silicon Valley at the center of the world's economy are charged up about the same things and taking some responsibility and doing some stuff, for them that's like, okay, this is good, we can make this work.
Great.
Thank you.
Another